There is a narrative in the Old Testament that, to me, is one of the most unsettling in the entire Bible. This account is not suitable for children, and I must emphasize that it may not be appropriate for all audiences, as it has the potential to bring up past traumas. The story in question is found in chapters 19 to 21 of the book of Judges. Although many are familiar with chapter 19, they often overlook the rest of the narrative, which I believe contains profoundly important lessons that should be drawn from such a distressing and dark tale. Before we dive into the lessons that can be drawn from this story, I would like to recount it with all the possible details. In Judges chapter 19, the narrative begins with the following sentence. In those days, when there was no king in Israel, a Levite who lived in a remote part of the hill country of Ephraim took a concubine from Bethlehem in Judah. The protagonist of the story is a Levite who lived in the northern region of Israel and took a woman from Bethlehem, in the south, as his concubine or wife, depending on how one interprets the term. The narrative continues with the information that this woman was unfaithful to the Levite and abandoned him, returning to her father's house in Bethlehem, where she stayed for 4 months. The Levite, determined to recover her, undertakes a long journey southward to bring her back. Upon arriving in Bethlehem, the Levite is warmly received by the concubine's father, who is extremely hospitable, but who repeatedly delays the Levite's departure, convincing him to stay longer. Finally, the Levite decides that it is time to leave, and he and his concubine begin their journey back home. During their trip through southern Israel, they decide not to spend the night in a foreign city, choosing instead to continue to Gibeah, a city belonging to the tribe of Benjamin, in the hope of finding a place to rest. However, upon reaching Gibeah, they face difficulties in finding someone willing to take them in, which was quite unusual given the high cultural value placed on hospitality at the time. Finally, an elderly man offers them shelter in his home. However, during the night, wicked men from the city surround the house, demanding that the Levite be handed over to them so that they can sexually assault him. The homeowner, desperate to protect his guest, proposes a terrible alternative. He offers his own virgin daughter and the Levite's concubine to the mob, allowing them to do with them as they wish. The result of this decision is a night of horror, in which the concubine is brutally raped and abused by the crowd until she dies. At dawn, her body is found on the doorstep by the Levite, who, upon realizing she is dead, takes her back home. In an act of deep despair and anger, he dismembers the concubine's body into 12 parts, sending each part to one of the tribes of Israel. This gesture triggers a wave of outrage and shock throughout the country. The following chapters, 20 and 21, recount the consequences of this atrocity, with the tribes of Israel uniting against the tribe of Benjamin, resulting in a large-scale civil war. The conflict is devastating, culminating in the near-total annihilation of the tribe of Benjamin, with only 600 men left alive. Feeling remorse for what had happened, the remaining Israelites seek a solution to prevent the complete extinction of the tribe of Benjamin, leading to more morally questionable decisions, further intensifying the chaos and pain resulting from the initial events. Reflecting on this story, several important lessons can be extracted. The first lesson refers to the danger that the lack of accountability brings, as is evident in the anarchy that reigned in Israel at the time. The absence of a governing authority allowed people to act according to their own desires and will, which inevitably led to catastrophic decisions and terrible consequences. The second lesson that emerges from this narrative is the importance of recognizing the intrinsic value of every human being, created in God's image. The Levite's willingness to sacrifice his concubine's life to save himself reveals a tragic lack of respect for her worth and dignity as a human being. The third lesson warns us of the danger of drifting away from God. As the people of Israel distanced themselves from their faith and religious principles, they became capable of committing unimaginable acts of violence and sin, demonstrating how the loss of spiritual direction can lead to profound moral decay. The fourth lesson to be drawn is that every bad decision brings consequences that we cannot control. The sequence of events narrated in the story clearly shows how one wrong choice can trigger a chain of suffering and moral compromise, affecting not only those directly involved, but also many innocent lives around them. Finally, The fifth lesson speaks of God's grace, which manifests even in the midst of our worst decisions. Despite the horrible events that occurred, the tribe of Benjamin was not completely exterminated, and there was still a path to redemption, though painful and difficult. The book of Judges ends with a poignant reminder. In those days, Israel had no king. Everyone did what was right in their own eyes. This story serves as a powerful warning about the consequences of living without moral and spiritual guidance, highlighting the importance of keeping our faith and principles as guiding lights for our actions and decisions.